Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Burlinson. In this season in 2026, we're going to spend some time looking back and replaying some of the episodes that some of you have asked about in your comments. And in between those, I'm going to be back with little snippets each week of helpful information that you can put into practice in your business, in your life, to help you grow your communication mastery. I hope you enjoyed that replay last week. Lots of different insights from that conversation with Jen, and just showed me again how widely communication really impacts every aspect of life, doesn't it? This week, I wanted to kind of pick up on some of that, but also to zero in on one particular area, and that's the whole area of accepting others as they are and then learning how to adapt to them, because it can be a challenge, can't it? When someone is very different from me, it can be hard to recognize how can I communicate with them, how can I connect with them more effectively. So let's dig into that a little bit as we go through this morning, through this week's episode. Um, the first thing I would say is that the more you can learn about all seven communication styles, the more familiar you can become with all seven communication styles, enables you to begin to find the gold in whichever style you're encountering first in somebody else. Now, remember, we're all a blend of all seven styles, and so it's never just one with anybody that you want to relate to or connect with, but we all have one or two or sometimes three that sort of stand out ahead of the others. And so understanding what's coming prominently from somebody else, or what is important, more important to someone else, is a very helpful way of beginning to understand them. And each style, and therefore each person who has that style foremost in their profile, each style has a strength that we can appreciate, something that that style brings to the table that's essential for healthy communication, for teamwork, just for community in general, but also for effective workplace fruitfulness. And a key need for each style that we can begin to meet that need and bring out the best in that style. So if you recognize what that style is bringing, but also how can I cultivate that strength from that style by meeting a need that that style has. Those two strategies are very valuable in seeing the gold in other people, particularly when they're different from me. Because the temptation is always to think, well, the way I'm wired is the best way, isn't it? And so that person who's very different from me, well, they're less than, or they're not as helpful, or they're not as easy to relate to. But actually, each person brings something very powerful to the blend of all of us. And when the passions of every style can be fully expressed, that's when the team benefits the most. The whole team benefits. I'm thinking particularly of teams where there are some styles that have not been accepted or valued as much. Maybe they've been overlooked in some way. And when that happens, the whole team is missing out on 1/7 or 2/7 of the potential of that team. And every time you reduce the team's potential, you also reduce the team's fruitfulness and effectiveness. And so that's a disastrous strategy when we try to make everybody like me, or when we try to make everybody like each other. Uniformity is always deadly in a team. Whereas when you bring all of these seven different communication styles together, they're so different, but when we can combine them in a useful blend, in a fruitful blend, then that's going to be much more effective for the teamwork. Now, when you want to relate to somebody who's wired very differently from you, you need to recognize, first of all, that the differences make it an obstacle for you to connect with that person, to relate to that person freely and easily. The easiest thing for us to do is to relate to people who are wired similarly to us. And the hardest thing is to relate to people who are wired very differently. Um, So look for the differences that are hard for you to understand or hard for you to accept. Uh, maybe it's, well, that person's just so blunt. They just come straight out with whatever they're thinking and or whatever they feel, and they just tell it straight like it is. And that's not how I operate, and so therefore I can't connect with them. They're just too blunt. They're pushing people away all the time. That kind of approach, or to look at the flip side of that coin, some of the people who some of us would think are too blunt would look at others and say, well, they're just so emotional. Why can't they get past their feelings and get on with something? That kind of approach. Or the third option, of course, would be, well, they're just so stuck in their head. They're no use to anybody because they're just so wrapped up in whatever they're thinking about. There's never any action on, or there's nothing to connect with on a feelings level. Those kinds of differences initially are hard for us to accept, particularly when we are wired in a different intelligence category. But when you use those intelligence categories to figure out which style you're seeing, then you can begin to look for the positives of that style. Because typically when you find somebody who's very different, it's their negatives that strike you the most clearly. It's the areas where you're so different from them that it's hard to accept them. But once you look for what do they bring that's valuable to everyone, what do they bring that's unique to them, what do they bring that I don't have, those kinds of questions, that then helps us to begin to see the value of the way that that person is wired as different from the way that I'm wired. And so I can look for the positive qualities in that communication style, the one that's primary for them, that may be very low for me, maybe even my last one. I can begin to appreciate and value what they bring to the table. Just to give you a simple example, I love the contemplator communication language because they think so deeply. But that's a very different wiring to the way I'm wired. I'm much more about get together and chat with people and network and make connections and bring people together. And none of that is conducive to thinking deeply in the moment. And so very often I will find it hard to relate in the immediate to somebody who's a very high contemplator. But at the same time, I recognize that they will have insight, they will have understanding, they will have a kind of philosophical approach that is foreign to my first language influencer. And that is a strength that I can benefit from if I learn to look for it and learn to draw it out. I've told the story in previous episodes of a friend of mine who was a first language contemplator who knew he needed to grow his ability to connect with other people. And he asked that he and I could meet for coffee once a week before work. And so we're in a coffee shop. He's a first language contemplator. He needs undivided attention. He needs personal space. And here we are in a coffee shop. We're surrounded by all kinds of other people that I know. And I'm trying to make sure I'm not distracted by the surroundings so that I can actually focus on him and help him to learn how to connect more effectively with other people. At the same time, he's helping me to learn how to think more deeply about things and how to dig below the surface, not to accept things just as they appear, but to look below the surface and to figure out what can I discover underneath this that's a benefit to me and others. And so we would have conversations like, hey, next time we meet, could you tell me what you think about whatever? Or could you research such and such for me so that you can tell me in a week or two what you've discovered? Giving him space to do the discovery, but also asking him to bring it back and connect with it. And I gained so much from those times, but there was a cost to it as well, because I had to not be distracted by other people passing by, maybe that I knew or I wanted to get to know. I needed to give him that undivided attention in order for that to work. It was a very fruitful season in my life and in his for us to recognize the positives and the strengths that each of us carried that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to connect with because they were so different. So that's the first thing. Use the intelligence categories to find what's valuable in that person that you find difficult to connect with. You know, that I mentioned about someone who's very blunt. Well, that blunt person is also very courageous, and they are of great value because of their courage. Or maybe they have something to teach me about being more courageous in a setting that I'm facing. That emotive person that you find so frustrating, maybe they're also intuitive, and they can discern, they can read the room in a way that I can't, because I'm not that intuitive kind of person. Um, Maybe they can close deals in a way that I can't because I push too hard. Or maybe that overthinker, the one who's just so stuck in their head all the time, that overthinker, it could be maybe really great with resource management. And I can draw that out if I understand it and recognize it. So looking for the gold within the dross is a valuable skill for us to learn. And it comes much more easily once I've learned all of the characteristics of all 7 communication styles, because now I know what I'm looking for. Um, have you ever been in a setting where you know you're looking for something, but you don't quite know what you're looking for? And then if you can see what it looks like, maybe you're looking for a bird in a tree out on a nature walk, or maybe you're looking for a pattern in a spreadsheet that tells you something about the data. Whatever it is, once you see what it is you're looking for, then you can find it more easily. And that's the same thing with communication. Looking for the positive is always a beneficial thing to do in order to accept others, but also to then adapt to them. So once I've begun to identify the positive in this person that I find it hard to connect with, or I find difficult to understand, then I can also begin to reflect on, where are my strengths challenging for them? Because I've just done the exercise with where are their strengths challenging for me. Now I just flip the coin and think, what is it about me that's going to be a hard thing for them? And how can I modify that in our interaction to help them to make a connection with me? So it's a two-way street in that way. Am I too verbal because I have a positive outlook? Or maybe I'm pushing for response too fast when they need time to think. What is it about the way I'm wired that's going to make it hard for us to communicate because I'm not adapting to what they need? Um, Maybe I need to be heard and understood, but that feels like an overemphasis on my perspective to the person I want to connect with. I need to dial that back some in order that I can hear from them. So when I identify which of the communication styles are in play, then I can develop a strategy to increase acceptance, to accept them as they are, and to look for the gold that they bring, and not just see the frustrations about their wiring that I find hard to understand or hard to accept. But also I can learn how to adapt how I show up, and not necessarily show up strongly in my preferred styles, but to leverage some of the styles in the middle of my profile in order to help them to connect with me more effectively as well. It increases my acceptance of others. It increases my adaptability to their preferences. And both of those approaches will reduce misunderstanding. And you'll be amazed at how much it reduces tension in your relationship with that person or those people. And remember, this is not necessarily just a one-on-one issue. The sorts of examples I've given, you've probably identified with multiple ones within your team at work, or within your friend circle, where there's this friend who's like that, or this colleague who's like the other. And you need to be able to make those adaptations in the moment. The more you practice it, you're not giving away who you are. You're not losing your uniqueness. You're actually adapting your uniqueness to be able to connect with each other's uniquenesses. And when you make those connections, that's when the light comes on. You know, electricity only flows when there's a circuit. And communication only flows when there's connectivity, when there's adaptability. So using these techniques to get past the initial obstacles and to reach the acceptance that's needed so that we can adapt to other people is a great skill to learn. And I hope that what we've talked about today has helped you to grow some in that whole area. I'd love to hear back from you. What stood out to you from what we've talked about today? What have you learned? What's one takeaway that you've taken from today's episode? Get to my website at markburlinson.com. Get to the contact form. Just drop me a little message and let me know what you've heard that's been helpful to you. I'd love to hear your feedback and give me your suggestions for future episodes while you're there. Thanks for being here today, and I'll see you back here next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean a lot to me if you'd rate and review the podcast so it helps more listeners to find us. But also, would you give me your feedback on things you'd like to hear about in future episodes? And remember to share the episode with a friend if you see something that would benefit them as well. You can reach me with feedback through my website at markburlinson.com. Just click on the contact button and send me a message. I respond to everyone personally, and I really want to hear from you. So thank you again for listening, sharing, reviewing, and giving me your feedback.